Okay, I think we're going to begin. I want to welcome you to the second installment of the Good Clinical Practice Workshop series. And this one is called Surviving a Research Audit. What is the FDA looking for when it performs an audit? And I'll introduce our wonderful presenter in a moment. I just want to tell you that I'm going to be putting a few things in the chats. And the first is that we have a webpage, and it tells about all of our present workshops that we're offering this semester, with at least one more or two more added on, hopefully soon. Single workshops, though, not doubles, not quadruples in this case. I also want to tell you that you can receive a certificate of completion if you attend all of the workshops. If you happen to miss one, please just email me, Catherine Sedota, at cmp9@buffalo.edu, and I will put that in the chat as well. And there's a protocol that you can complete in order to make up the work, in order to get the certificate of completion. There's also a micro-credential in good clinical practice, and the micro-credential involves assignments associated with the content that is being covered within the workshops. And if you're interested in that, that can get you a digital badge, which you can actually connect to an electronic portfolio, and that will showcase the fact that you received the digital badge from the University at Buffalo, from our micro-credentials office, and it will have assignments that are connected to it so that someone who's interested can actually view a piece of your work that you did in order to receive the micro-credential. And I'll put my email in chat for that as well. And finally, you can get up to 6 CME credits for this workshop series if you do need them, as long as you attend all the workshops, and I will be sending that to the CME department at some time after the workshops are completed. And now I want to introduce Dr. Richard Karalus, who is Director of the Office of Research Compliance. He is perfect for this particular presentation. He knows a lot about surviving a research office and specifically what the FDA is looking for when it performs an audit. And this is incredible. I have seen this workshop a couple of times, and I'm always in awe about the knowledge that he has. And I'm going to turn it over to him.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so my name is Dr. Rich Karalus. I'm the director of the Office of Research Compliance. So not only do we give audits sometimes, we also are subject to many audits from many different agencies, including OHARP, AHARP, OLAW, FDA as well. And in my past life, I actually ran a select agent laboratory, which deals with biological agents, and had select agent inspections as well. So I have had a lot of different inspections from a lot of different government offices, and I hope to share some knowledge that can help you with FDA audits. We've had a couple of FDA audits already here at in my present office, and I'll go through those. So disclosures, first of all, I have no financial or other conflicts of interest with talking about this subject or with CTSI, so just wanted to share that with you. So our learning objectives are going to be for surviving a research audit, providing an overview of good clinical practice, what it entails. And I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail. Most of what I'm going to deal with is how you should run your study to be compliant with an audit. So it's going to be all GCP, although it's not going to sound like GCP. And also developing an understanding of and responsibilities of the entities involved with a compliant trial. So I'll talk about, the roles of people and what they should be doing and what they shouldn't be doing, and what the FDA is going to expect people to do. So. All right. So basically, why does the FDA come? They want to know that you're conducting your trials in accordance with the clinical goals of your investigation. So these are primarily drug and device type studies where you're primarily involved in testing new drugs and devices, and they just want to make sure that the studies are being run in accordance with with what was approved for the study, so that the data that you collect is valid when they have to make a decision as to whether to approve or disapprove a new drug or device. All right, so when the FDA shows up, the first rule is don't panic. Everybody gets afraid, including myself, when the FDA shows up. And like I said, they're not the enemy. They're actually there to help you. And they are going to find issues with your study. They almost always find issues with your study. I've talked with numerous inspectors, and if they go back to their office and they don't find issues, then their bosses are going to complain that they're not doing a good enough job. So the issues that they find, some may be major, some may be minor, but they're not there to shut you down. They're actually there to just make sure that you're doing a good job with your study and to help you improve your study. All right, so the first thing I want to talk about is we talked a little bit about who's in charge, who should be doing what. And the one thing I want to point out is if you're the principal investigator, whether it be of your site or it be a multi-site study, the principal investigator is the person in charge. I've seen investigations where the PI tries to deflect this and say, well, you know, somebody else in my study did that wrong. It wasn't my issue. It was somebody else. The buck stops there with the investigator. If you're the principal investigator, you are in charge of everything, and that includes everybody under you. So you can never blame it on somebody else. You're basically responsible for the overall conduct of the entire site. They're going to be looking at administration or dispensing of drug and test articles. They're going to make sure that you are collecting and maintaining your data with what agrees with the study that was approved. And also, if you have a team of investigators, which almost everybody does, they're going to make sure that you are giving the proper oversight of your entire team, because you are responsible for what your team does, not the other way around. So the program that the FDA uses is called the Bio-Research Monitoring Program, called BMO, and I have a site there. When you get my presentation, there's a site there that you can click on, and you can get some more information on the BMO site. I'm going to give you a lot of links to go through, and I would strongly suggest you go and visit the links. They have a lot of information. If you do FDA studies, if you do a lot of them, you're going to get audited sooner or later, whether it be for cause, not for cause, or them just checking up randomly on you. So the objectives of the program are sort of twofold. First of all, they want to protect the rights and safety and welfare of the subjects involved, but they also want to verify that the data that you're collecting for your trial will support them making a decision as to whether they can approve or disapprove of a drug study. So if you're in a drug study or a device study, you're going to have very specific procedures that you need to follow in order to collect the data that the FDA wants in order to make that decision. So they're going to be closely looking to make sure that you follow the procedures that were approved, so that your data is valid when they come to making the decision. And I have the compliance program manual there. I have some links to it further down that you may want to take a look at, just to make sure that you know what they're looking for. What's the regulatory authority? It's basically Section 704 of the FDA, Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, which allows them to, upon presenting appropriate credentials, to perform an audit at any time. They can conduct inspections at any reasonable time with reasonable limits and in a reasonable manner. This includes the ability to inspect and copy any required records related to the clinical investigation. I quote that because the one thing that the FD&C Act does not define is what is considered reasonable. So the FDA kind of has their own definition of what's considered reasonable, and you have no say in that. So FDA, when an inspector shows up, generally they don't show up out of the blue. They usually call you about maybe 2 or 3 days, sometimes the day before, and let you know, hey, we're coming for an audit, be prepared. Their announcement is not something that you can work with them and come up with an appointment or a date that's convenient to you. It's basically just a courtesy call so that you can get your staff together, you can get your records together, so that when they show up, you are prepared to give them what they need. There's very, very limited circumstances where they would delay that audit or inspection. It would have to be really serious for them to delay it. Normally, they just call you a day or two or three and tell you we're showing up on Monday, and we expect you to host us for an inspection. So or actually, I should say, 2 FDA inspections. I got a call on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, and they told me that they were going to show up the Monday after Thanksgiving to audit our IRB. So that's the type of notification you get. There was no, no saying, oh, well, that doesn't give us enough time, or, the holiday gets in the way. Can we postpone it? No, that is not an issue. They come when they want to come, and they expect you and your study team to be there and to have records available for them to perform the inspection. And the more that you're prepared, the faster the inspection and the more effective the inspection will be, and you'll get it out of your way. And I'll talk about that in the future. So, all right. So when are inspections conducted? Sometimes they just come out of the blue, random. You get chosen randomly. That's kind of what we got chosen. Sometimes they'll do it at the termination of a clinical study. Sometimes they'll do it for a cause if they get complaints from either subjects, or sometimes the sponsor may have concerns with your site and they want the FDA to come and take a look at your site. Sometimes the review divisions will come and tell the BMO, which is a separate entity to who's overlooking your study, that they'd like an audit to be done of your site or all of the sites. Or sometimes if they have a new product, say, for a new disease, something like COVID, they may want to rapidly test a new drug or device. And they may want the BMO office to go and do an audit to kind of confirm that their SOPs are working. So there's a lot of reasons why they may come to your site. And basically, like I said, if you've done enough FDA studies, they are going to show up at one point or another for any one of these reasons to do an inspection.
We have a question in chat. May I ask it?
Oh, certainly, yeah.
Brian's asking, do they provide a sample of trials to audit upon their arrival?
They will give it. Well, it depends upon. Usually, they are looking at a certain trial, so they don't generally come and audit all the trials at a site. They will pick out like your study and say, we're auditing your study. Or in our case, from the Office of Research Compliance, they were auditing our IRB to make sure that our IRB was compliant with FDA regulations. Does that answer your question?
Brian, is that good?
Oh, yes. Thanks, Rich.
Thanks.
Sure thing. Okay. So yeah, what happens when the FDA auditor shows up? They're actually very formal. I've had them show up in their full uniform. Sometimes they come and they're actually attached to the Navy. So one of the first inspectors we had a Navy uniform on, and she showed up with her badge. And the second inspector we had just showed up in street clothes, but they have their badge, and they're required to show their FDA credentials when they show up. And they'll also come with a form, an FDA 482, which is a notice of inspection form. And they'll give you those two things before they perform their inspection, and they have to give those. So if you don't get those two, then you're probably not dealing with a true FDA auditor. Those are the two things an FDA auditor will show you. They will show you their credentials, and they'll give you a form FDA 482, which is a notification of inspection. Typically, what they're going to do is they're going to pick people from your research staff and interview them and ask them questions. They're going to talk with you as the PI, and they're also going to want to interview people on your team. And that's pretty much how they're going to conduct their inspections. So what are they going to be looking for? They're going to be looking for a lot of things. Sometimes it's just general. They're looking just to see how your overall study is doing. Other times they may look for specific items, but I'll kind of go through a list of the items that they may be looking for. So first of all, a lot of what they look for is who performs what and how they do it. So if you're the PI, a lot of times you're going to delegate a lot of the tasks to people on your study staff. Certain people may do consent. Certain people may collect the data and do data analysis. Other people may do the actual protocol or do the actual study with the subjects. And they're going to want to talk with a lot of those people and figure out to make sure that they are following the SOPs. So that's important when you're doing an FDA study. One of the most important things is the study is outlined very specifically. When the FDA does clinical studies, they have specific SOPs and they want you to follow them by the letter. The only time you can vary from an SOP is when it has subject safety involved. That's the only time you can vary from an SOP without getting it approved first. So never change what you're doing from your SOP. SOP stands for Standard Operating Procedure, for those of you who don't know. I'm sorry if I use acronyms. Feel free to ask me to define them if I do it. I came from the DoD where everything was acronyms, so I tend to use them liberally. But yeah, so when you get your procedures approved, whether it be by your IRB or by a study sponsor, you need to follow those to the T. And that's one of the things that the FDA almost always looks for is is everything that you're doing the part of the approved protocol, and are your staff following it? They're also going to look at data collection. They want to make sure that the data that you're collecting is the way that it should be. So most clinical studies will have data collection spreadsheets and very specific on what types of data you're going to collect, how you collect it, and how you record it. And they're going to be looking closely at how you collect it and record it. Proper accountability of investigational products. They're going to be looking at if you have drugs or devices in your inventory. When you hand those out to subjects, they want to make sure that you document who gets what, how, when they got it, how much they got. And those records better match what's in your inventory or what's not in your inventory. They will be looking at that very closely as well.
Kim?
They're also going to look at, yes?
Oh, I'm sorry. Kim has added something. May I read it for you?
Sure.
While they generally are coming for one study, it is important to provide a separate area for them to review that study, which I know you're going to cover.
Mm-hmm.
Take the records for that study to them. If they want, they can ask this. I think this is what you're saying. If they want, they can ask about other studies if they see you have other studies ongoing, especially true if they are coming for a for-cause audit.
Yes, they can ask about other studies, but in general, usually they focus on a single study. If it's a for-cause audit and you're just being looked at for, general performance of all of your studies, because if you're messing up on one study, you may be messing up on other studies, then they may look at your entire portfolio of studies. But like I said, most of the FDA audits that I see come for a single study. So, all right. And last thing I look for is, well, not the last thing, but disclosure. They want to see conflict of interest disclosures and make sure that you have them on file. Many times, a drug company will pay you to give presentations on your clinical study. You need to make sure that when they do that, when they send you to a conference to give a talk and they give you an honorarium or pay for your travel, you need to make sure that that gets on your COI, your conflict of interest annual disclosure. Within 30 days is the guidance. So if they pay you to go to an audit, you need to go back to your annual disclosure and make sure that you put that, your drug company or whomever paid you an honorarium. They're going to be looking at that closely, because that can lead to some bias when you're recruiting a person. So if you have a significant financial interest, they don't want you to be the person who is recruiting subjects because you have a conflict of interest with recruiting subjects. So that's important. They want to make sure that you have any financial or other conflicts on your disclosure, and that there may be and that you may need a management plan if it's a significant disclosure. All right. Consent is going to be something that they look at closely also. They're going to want to make sure that you performed your informed consent properly. And informed consent is probably one of the most important things for the safety of subjects. They want to know, did you give your subject time to consider being in the study? Did you discuss it with them? Consent isn't just handing somebody a consent form and saying, read it, and if you want to be in the study, sign it. It is a two-way street. You need to hand them the consent form, give them time to digest the consent form, then give them an opportunity to discuss it with a member of the subject, a member of the study team who is knowledgeable enough to answer their questions. Sometimes that may be the PI, sometimes that may be a member of the study staff, but it needs to be sure that it's a person who understands all of the aspects of the study and can answer those questions. They want to make sure that your consent forms are in language that's understandable to the subjects. In most cases, the IRB will cover that, and also drug sponsors who usually put together the consent forms will cover that. But you may be an investigator who's doing your own study, and they want to make sure that your consent forms are in a language that a reasonable person will understand, or your subject pool will understand. They want to make sure that your consent forms are signed and dated before subjects enter a study. So sometimes we've seen a few cases where subjects are kind of tested or undergo certain tests before they enroll in the study. And sometimes that can be considered part of recruitment. But normally that is part of the study, and you need to make sure that if that's part of your study, that those people were consented and signed the consent form with a date that predates when you began tests on the study. Also want to talk about the 8 basic elements and 6 additional elements of consent that will need to be included. I'm not going to go through theirs. I have actually a list of those. I'm not going to go through those in detail, because those, for the most part, are covered in standard consent forms. So if you go on our for example, on UB's IRB site, we have a template for consent, and it will include all of the required elements of consent, and it will contain the optional elements of consent, and it will give you guidance on which of those optional ones you need to include or which you can exclude. So sponsors also know the elements of consent as well and what's required. So in general, that's usually covered by the IRB and by the sponsor if it's a sponsored drug study. But there may be times if you are a PI who has an independent study where you're going to need to decide which of those elements needs to be in your consent form. But the FDA will definitely be looking at your consent form and making sure that those elements of consent. So these are the additional elements of consent. You'll get this presentation so you can go through them in detail at your leisure. All right, they're also going to be looking at communications. If you don't document communications, if you don't save them, then they never happen. So remember that. That's actually a very important point. If you don't have documentation for anything in a study, the FDA auditor will consider that it never happened, even if it did. They're going to want to look at progress of your investigation. If you said you're going to be recruiting 100 subjects, they may be looking to see how well you're doing on recruitment. They may want to look at, the progress. If you're collecting data, they may want to see the data and see, does it, agree with what they expect to see, or are they seeing a lot of outliers, or is the study working or not working for them? So the next one is important: corrective actions. If you were previously audited by the FDA and they made you put together a corrective action plan, they will almost definitely have that corrective action plan in hand and probably be looking at to make sure that you instituted your corrective action plan when you said it was going to be implemented, and make sure that it was effective. So definitely make sure, if you have a corrective action plan from a previous audit, that you followed it and that you implemented it. And if you didn't, why you didn't. They're also going to be looking at your study staff. Again, you're going to be delegating a whole lot of items to other people on your study staff, and they're going to want to make sure that the PI has oversight and supervision. I'll go through that a little bit more over your study staff and make sure that takes place. And again, all of this needs to be documented. You can't just say, yeah, I meet with them on a weekly basis and we talk about it. That needs to, if you do meet with them on a weekly basis, you should put together an agenda and a summary of what you talked about at your weekly meeting, or whatever your form of supervision is. Again, if it isn't documented, it didn't happen. All right, so supervision, I kind of talked about this. When you delegate tasks, they're going to make sure that the person that you delegate them is properly qualified. Again, I talked about consent. If you're delegating the task of consent to somebody or answering questions to somebody, you need to make sure that those people are qualified to answer those questions. You also need to make sure that you give all of your study staff specific training on the new study. So, if you get handed a study to do from a sponsor, you're going to need to train your staff on what their responsibilities are for the study, how they're going to carry out the study, and provide training programs. And you need to make sure that you document that training. So, put together an agenda for your training. It may be for the whole study staff together or individual study staff, but again, that needs to be documented. You need to have what date that you met with people, what subjects you covered, and in some cases, you can have your study staff sign off on it, that they understood it. It's always a good idea to have a sign-up sheet. And I like to have the sign-up sheet signed at the end of the training program. That makes sure that nobody snuck out early on it. And I always put in a subject that says you understood the training and all of your questions were answered, and you sign off on that. And that basically tells you that your study staff understood your training program. They understand what they need, and you answered all of their questions. If you have additional sites, say you're the lead PI for the entire study, and you have other studies, you need to have document how you supervise those other sites, and how you make sure that they are performing properly as well. And the FDA is going to be looking at all of this. This is important when they're looking at you as a whole site. All right, they may also want to look at comparison of your data according to other sites. So they may have gone to other sites on the study and want to make sure that your data looks a lot like theirs, and that it's also in line with what they expect at the end of the study. So if you have case report forms or any of the source documents that you're required to collect for the study, they're going to want to make sure that you have those records available for the study. Again, signed and dated consent forms, any medical records that you said that you were going to collect, for recruitment of your subjects. You need certain subjects that have certain conditions. You may need to pull their medical charts in order to know whether they have those conditions. They're going to want to see those records. Anytime you do exams in relation to the study, they're going to want to see those documents on the exams, any diagnosis. Want to make sure that you're following up on your subjects. If they're taking anything that might result in a disqualification of the data, say they took a drug that they shouldn't have taken, they're going to want to make sure that you have documentation to that, because you may need to give that data with an asterisk, or even omit that data from your FDA submission. Again, any adverse events that you have during your study, they're going to want to make sure that you document those adverse events. Many of those will also be submitted to the IRB if you have adverse events. They're going to want to make sure if they need to be submitted to the IRB, that those were submitted to the IRB. And if you're using any electronic records, they may audit you using a complex regulation called 21 CFR Part 11. And that, if you're doing electronic records, the University of Buffalo right now does not meet the 21 CFR Part 11 requirements for electronic records. So if you're doing anything electronic records, make sure that the host of those electronic records, be it your sponsor or another site, are the ones who have compliance with 21 CFR Part 11 because the University of Buffalo does not. It's a really complex program, and right now we just don't have the breadth of and the volume of FDA studies to merit going into that requirement. Okay, so they're also going to want to look and make sure that you are following GCP. I'm not going to go into GCP requirements a whole lot because kind of what I'm covering is all GCP requirements. When I say you need to follow your SOPs to the T, don't make any changes unless they get approved. And when I say get approved, you cannot follow changes that you submit for approval until they actually get approved. So if you're submitting a change for your protocol, whether it be with a sponsor or with the IRB, you cannot make that change until it gets approved either by the IRB or by a sponsor, or sometimes both. And that's in accordance with good clinical practices. They're also going to be looking at to make sure that you are meeting the contract that you signed with the FDA. So there's a form FDA 1572, Statement of Investigator, that investigators are required to sign and submit to the FDA with your study. And that form FDA 1572, some people just sign it, oh, this is just a requirement, that I need to sign to do an FDA study. That is actually your contract with the FDA as to how you're going to perform a study. And they're going to take that form and look and make sure that your compliance on the program meets the requirements of the FDA form 1572. So when you sign that form, make sure you read it so that you understand what your requirements are in carrying out the study, because the FDA will. All right, so I'll kind of sum up some of the stuff that they're going to be looking at on your study. So again, source of subjects, did the subjects that you said that you're going to enroll exist? So if you say you're going to enroll 100 subjects, they want to make sure that your subject pool has at least 100 subjects that you can enroll. Do they have the disease that you're studying? They're going to be looking very closely at the people that you recruit in your study to make sure that they meet the inclusion criteria or are excluded from the study if they meet the exclusion criteria, and make sure that the subjects that you have in your study actually meet the inclusion criteria for your study. IRB review. Did you have IRB approval before you carried out the study? They're going to want to see that. In many cases, it may not be the UB IRB. You may have to get approval, or if it's a lot of clinical studies, whether they be drug or device studies from a sponsor, the University of Buffalo may not be the IRB of record. It may be a commercial IRB or another IRB at another institution. But regardless of whether it's the UB IRB, a commercial IRB, or the IRB from another institution, they're going to want to make sure that you have IRB approval before you start your study, and that you follow everything that was IRB approved. Consent, again, they're going to be looking very closely to make sure that consent was obtained from all of your subjects before you perform any test on your study. Again, adherence to the protocol. The protocol is the law. You need to follow the protocol by the T. Don't make changes unless you get those changes approved first. They're going to be verifying your primary efficacy measures. So they're going to be looking at your data very closely to make sure that you are collecting the proper data, that they can either demonstrate efficacy at the end of the study. So again, the protocol will have what data you're expected to collect and how you're expected to collect it and analyze it. And they're going to be looking very closely to make sure that your data is collected properly in accordance with the study. So make sure that if you have any data collection forms, they are followed and filled into the T, that you haven't missed any data points that you need to collect, or missed anything that you need in order to validate your data for the study. Adverse events, again, they're going to want to make sure that you collect data on any adverse events that take place. And in many cases, they will they will have forms and such and for adverse events, and make sure that you collected any adverse event data collected. Safety data. If you're required, say you have a drug or device study, and they're going to be looking for safety data. Is the drug doing what it should be doing? Is it perhaps interfering with other safety measures? You know, is it having any side effects, is what I'm trying to say, that they may not foresee. So they may be looking for certain tests that you need to perform. You know, did you carry out an EKG? Did you collect tests on let's say a liver profile to make sure that the drug that you're testing isn't interfering with normal normal other body functions that they want to see. So if they're looking for any safety data, they want to see that you collected information to make sure that the drug or device you're testing is working safely. And again, drug accountability. They're going to want to make sure that you can account for all of the drug that you have on hand, or all of the drug that you've passed out to subjects, and that goes with devices as well. Blinding of data. You know, they're going to want to make sure if you're collecting, if it's a blinded study, that the data was collected properly in a blinded fashion. They're going to want to see that as well. All right, so now I'll kind of go into some specifics on audits and what to do, and give you tips on how to handle auditors. So,
and I can tell you that Kim added that their last auditor asked to see their local SOPs about elements of study conduct and reviewed them as to adherence to the SOP. So she's telling you that everything you're saying is true. So that's what auditors are going to be looking for, among other things.
Yeah. Okay. So the first item I'm going to say is be prepared. Like I said, the auditor normally gives you a couple of days to prepare for the inspection. And that is your time to go into super mode and collect all the documents and have them all in one place and ready for the inspector. They may not ask for all of them, but you should have them on hand, because the quicker you can get to them, the quicker you can get them the records, the quicker they're going to finish their inspection. And they also have confidence if you can quickly supply them with records that your study is doing well. So have everything available in one place for your auditors, so that you can retrieve it instantly. You don't have to give it to them. Only give them what they're asking for, and I'll cover that a little bit later. But nevertheless, have all the documents and all the information on your study available in one place, or know how to quickly retrieve it. If you have electronics records, it's a good idea to print those out in order to provide them to your auditor quickly, rather than having to scamper and figure out how to print all of that information out. Like I said, you may have to give it to them, you may not, but if you do, it's much quicker if you have those printed out beforehand, rather than having to go and take the time to print it out while they're waiting for the inspection. It makes the inspection go out a whole lot quicker. Don't ever make after the fact changes. When they come in and they ask for something, and if you don't have it, oops, shame on you. Yes, you don't have it, but don't try and come up with and make up documents that you don't have, or change documents that were perhaps done incorrectly. The auditors will pick up on that very quickly, and that will actually bode worse than just admitting we didn't do this properly. Because then if you falsified one thing, they're going to be looking at your entire study to look, oh, what else did you do wrong? If you don't have something, you can tell them, oh, we messed up here, we don't have this, or we realized this when we collected the information for the audit. And you can kind of have a corrective action plan kind of in place for them when they find an issue that you might have been lacking. So never try and make changes after the fact once they announce an inspection. If you need medical records, order them before the inspector comes. There's nothing worse than an inspector waiting and you having to go and order medical records, which may take some time. to get, and they're just sitting twiddling their thumbs waiting for you to get those records to them. So if you have medical records that you said that you were going to collect for the study, have them available for the auditor. You may not need to give it to them. They may not ask for them, but having them in place is will make an audit go a whole lot smoother. Okay. They also want to talk with your study staff. You have, like I said, usually you have a couple of days. Get your study staff all together and talk with them about giving them guidelines on what they should be talking about the auditors with, and what they shouldn't be talking about it. You always want to make sure that your study staff are answering questions honestly and truthful. Don't want to be making stuff up or looking or lying to an inspector, because they will find out real quickly, and that will put a big black mark on you and your study. So make sure that you go over ground rules and make sure that study staff answer questions honestly and truthful. And if they don't know them, I'll talk about this a little bit. You can say, I don't know, and I'm going to get the information. It's not taboo to say that if it's something that you aren't expected to know on the spot. A good idea, if you have an FDA inspector, is to dedicate a person to kind of be at the beck and call of the FDA inspector. So, it's usually you can get somebody from your administrative staff and say, you know what, you're going to be the person who's going to be the point person with the FDA person. You're going to be the person who's going to go and check up on them, or I'm going to give you their contact information if they want something. And you're going to be responsible for either getting it or knowing who to contact to get it. I usually pick my administrative assistant and tell them, you know what, if you don't hear from them, maybe every couple of hours going in and check up on them and ask them if they need anything. You also want to find a workspace for your auditor. It's kind of important where you find a workspace. It's a great idea to find a workspace that's out of earshot. The worst thing you want to do is give them an office right next to you. They ask for something, and all of a sudden, through the thin walls of your office, they hear you guys scrambling. Oh, where is this? We need to find this. Nothing could be worse than them hearing, you don't have something, or you're trying to figure out how to answer a question. So find a nice office out of earshot. A good idea sometimes on a separate floor or way down the hallway where they can't hear, what your staff is talking about. I want to make sure it's a comfortable place. A lot of times I find a boardroom for them, and I'll give them a boardroom, that has a nice table, or an empty office with a desk is also a good place for them. Some place where they have a bit of privacy as well. So make sure you have a good place that you can station them. Sometimes the audits are done in a day. Sometimes they may be there for several days or even longer, depending upon how in-depth their audit is, and also how prepared you are to give them what they're asking for. Another thing, when the auditor asks you for things, make sure you document what you provide to them, so that what you've given them, and also what they returned to you, or what they took with them. You want to make sure you have a full record of what happened to your records. If you gave it to them and they gave it back, or they took it with them, make sure that you know what you've given them. Even if it's a copy, make sure you know what you've given them, because when they start asking questions, then you'll know what you've given them, or what you haven't given them. They may have questions and you say, oh, we didn't give you this record. You can quickly look at your records and say, oh, we missed you. We should have given you this and we didn't. And that also shows to the auditor that, you know what you're doing. All right. Another thing is be proactive. Don't wait until you have an auditor at your door to do what I'm going to tell you to do right now. Like I said, if you're planning on doing a lot of FDA studies, be proactive. Know what they're going to come for. Know what they're looking for. Know how they usually will communicate with you. Know what they're looking for. Know common items that they find issues with. And there is a lot of guidance out there on how to handle FDA audits, what they're going to look for, how to handle issues. And basically, I'm providing a lot of links in this presentation that you should go for. So there's a lot of guidance from the FDA. I have them here, the information sheet. guidance for IRBs, clinical investigators, sponsored FDA inspections, and clinical investigators. These are documents. Go to the FDA website and read these before an auditor shows up at your door, because you're not going to have time when they give you the 2 days inspection notice to go and read all of these. These are in-depth documents that I'm giving you links to. It's a great idea to go and look at them if you're involved with an FDA audit, because then you're going to know what they're looking for. This will give you guidance on what you should have at hand, common questions they're going to ask you, common questions you may have for them. And like I said, read this stuff now before they show up as an audit, because it will make your audit that much smoother. It will also reduce the stress involved with an audit, because you're going to know what they're looking for and how the process works. So, all right. Talked about your staff. You're going to be delegating a lot of things to other staff, and that's going to be an important thing that the FDA is going to be looking for is your staff. Are they properly trained? So job descriptions, have their job descriptions, have training plans. If you've given them training for the study, have those training plans. And that may be your agenda for your training program. Training records, again, have training records that have whoever attended and have a signature stating that they understood the training. Any licenses that they may need to carry out the study. If you have phlebotomists, make sure you have their licenses to do phlebotomy. CVs, resumes, you should have all of that available for an auditor. Again, a supervision plan. If you meet with your staff on a weekly basis to talk about the study, have those records of those meetings. Any oversight. If you had to correct somebody or meet with somebody on the side, have documentation that you did that. A delegation of what you actually delegated to different staff members. You should have a record of that as well, so that your auditor knows what staff are responsible for what duties. Procedural documents, again, have your SOPs, any forms, data collection forms or safety forms or anything. Make sure you have those on hand. And make sure, like I said, it's important that you follow your SOPs to the letter. Don't be making any changes to the SOPs unless those are approved before you make those changes. The only time you can make changes are if it's in the interest of subject safety. Then you can vary from your SOPs in the interest of subject safety, but that is the only time you are allowed to vary from your SOPs on an FDA study. All right, here's some more guidance that I'm going to give you. This is basically a program guide on compliance on your study. This has a lot of information in it. This covers GCP, what they're going to be looking for, what they expect, how they expect you to carry out their study. I strongly suggest you go and read this, like I said, before your auditor gives you notification, because these documents are documents that it's going to take a while for you to digest. You can't do this in addition to preparing for an audit all at once. This is another document, like I said, go through it, read it, and it will give you an understanding of how the FDA expects you to carry out your study and what they're going to be looking for when they show up for an audit. So, all right. So this is the FDA Form 1572. Statement of investigator. They're gonna make you sign this if you want to do an FDA study. Read this thoroughly and understand it, because they're going to be looking at this. This is your contract with the FDA, and the FDA is going to expect you to carry out your end of the contract. So before you sign this, don't just make this a check mark that this is what I need to do to provide the FDA with, with a document that they're going to expect to see in the contract when they give me the FDA study to carry out. This is your contract with them on how you are going to carry out the study, and they're going to make sure that you carry it out to the letter. So read the FDA Form FDA 1572. Don't just go to the end of it, sign it, and give it to SBS and the IRB because that's what they expect to see. All right. Again, here's another document that you should go through. It's the Regulatory Procedures Manual. This is another FDA document that they are going to expect you to be following. It's relatively long. Again, you can't be expected to go through this right before an audit because you are not going to have the time to go through this along with all of the other documents that I've given you to review and get ready for an auditor. These are things to be proactive. Go through this now when you sign up to do an FDA study rather than when an auditor shows up at your door. This will also give you a great understanding on what type of GCP they're going to be looking for on your study. So again, I'm not going to cover them in detail because these are relatively large documents, but this is how the FDA it gives you instructions on how to carry out your studies. And if you know this in advance, you're going to know how to properly run an FDA study, and you'll get in have much less problems with an audit. All right, another good idea is conduct a mock inspection. If you've never had an audit done before by the FDA, you might want to have a mock audit. So the university has an auditing office that you can contact, or you can contact the IRB. The IRB does some audits as well, and you can ask us to perform a mock audit of your study. You don't have to tell your study staff that it's a mock audit because you don't want them to know. You want them to kind of be faced with the pressure of an audit, but you can definitely have a mock audit prepared on your study to make sure that your study staff is more prepared and more comfortable with audits rather than the FDA being the first one to show up at your lab and want to do an audit. So we may not look at the same items that the FDA may want to look at, but like I said, if you're more comfortable with having audits done, they're definitely less stressful the more audits that you have done. And it's much better to have an audit done by an internal team, whether it be the IRB, our internal audit here at the university, or even if you want to conduct your own audit with your study staff, because you may find issues that you didn't realize existed until you had your inspection, and you can fix them before the FDA shows up and have a corrective action plan in place before the FDA ever shows up. All right, so I'll give you some do's and don'ts, some things that are very relevant. So when an FDA auditor shows up, give a perception that you're in control. Be self-confident. First impressions are critical. If you look scared to death of the auditor, they're going to be looking much closer because they're going to, be wondering, oh, this person looks really nervous. Are they doing the audit correctly? There's always going to be some degree of nervousness, especially when an FDA auditor shows up. I can't say that I don't have a bit of nervousness, but again, if you show that you are in control, that you have a lot of confidence that you are doing your study properly, and in most cases, most investigators are doing their studies properly, so have that confidence that you're doing it properly. Are they going to find issues? Like I said, yes, they will find issues with your study. Most of them will be minor for the most part, and if they find some major issues, you can always put a corrective action plan in place as well. But like I said, the first impressions are critical. If you don't look nervous and if you look confident, then that confidence exudes to your auditor, and they have more confidence in you. Identify your context experts early. Have your study staff ready. Know which study staff can address which parts of the study, so that when an auditor asks to speak with part of your study staff who's carrying out a certain part, you can pass them off to that person. And also let that person know that if the FDA asks for that part of the study, let's say you have a person who's doing consent, that they're going to be expected to talk with the auditor about consent. And also let those experts know that if they're asked by the FDA for an area that's not part of their responsibility, that they should be referring the FDA auditor to the person who does have that expertise, rather than trying to answer questions that they may not know of. Again, always tell the truth. Never give false data or information. You want to show to the FDA that people are answering truthfulness. Sometimes it hurts. Sometimes you may be doing something wrong or may have missed something. admit to it rather than trying to lie to the auditor or cover your back. Because, like I said, they will find that. And if they find that, you are in their crosshairs, and they will show up more often for audits if they suspect that you have that you're lying to them. And that's kind of what we covered earlier. They may look at additional programs if they suspect that you're lying on one program. What's to say you're not doing it on other FDA studies that you're involved with? Whenever they ask questions, speak to your SOPs. Have copies of your SOPs with you, and you can reference them when the FDA is asking. It's much easier to have those documents on hand, and if they ask a question that you may not quite know, you can look in your SOP and refer, this is how we do it, and here's the SOP on how we do it. Sometimes it's okay to say also, I don't know. A lot of people, the FDA asks you for a question and you don't know it. You know that you've done it, or you know that somebody in your study knows about something that you don't. Don't try and answer a question or come up with what you think is going on if you don't know it, but you know it exists someplace else in your study. So it's never a bad thing to say, you know what, I don't know it, but we do have that information. Such and such a person knows this information. You may want to speak with them, or let me go and find the record on it before I answer the question, and we can go through it, at a later date. I know that shows confidence, that the auditor, says, you're not just, trying to pull one over on them.
Brian is wondering if other universities offer mock audits for UB's benefits.
We've never looked into another university doing it. I imagine they might just do it. I've often thought about working with other universities and asking them to, work with us on audits. So if you can get another university to do it, that'd be great. And we would love to do that, but we haven't done that in the past. But that is a good idea. That's a very good idea. Mm-hmm.
And kind of like vice versa, right? Maybe UB could help another.
Yes, exactly. We do that sometimes with, investigations where we'll use somebody from another university to add a person who doesn't have any interest in, the study. But yeah, that's a great idea. Mm-hmm. So here's another tip. This is actually an important tip. It's okay to sit in silence. There is a tool that people use very effectively, and I was taught this. It's called the golden moment of silence. So some FDA auditors use this, and many auditors use this. It's called the golden moment of silence. If you want to get additional information out of a person, when you ask a question and they answer it, be silent. This works. You can test this with people. The golden moment of silence. If you don't think you're getting all of the information from a person, you ask them the question and then look at them and sit there silent, and sometimes kind of tilt your head and sit there in silence. 9 out of 10 times, a person will offer additional information because they want to fill that moment of silence. This works. This is a trick that people use. It's called the golden moment of silence. People don't like silence. They feel that they have to fill it with additional information, and that could be an auditor's trick to get additional information out of you. So don't fall for the golden moment of silence. Be courteous and maintain a positive attitude. Again, self-confidence shows with an auditor. If they feel that you're self-confident and you're doing your study well, then they're probably going to ask you less questions. If they ask you a question and you don't understand it, or it's overly broad and it would take you hours to come up with an answer, have them narrow it down. Tell them you don't understand it, or, that's so broad, what exactly are you looking for? And narrow it down. It'll make it easier for both you and the inspector to get to the point of what they're looking for, and mostly shorten your inspection. And sometimes your auditor or inspector may misunderstand what you've told them. They may spit it out, or during your exit interview, they may say something and that's inaccurate. It's not a bad thing to point out, you know what, I think you may have misunderstood what we told you, and go through it with the inspector and get them the correct information and straighten it out before they go back to their office and write you up. Inspectors don't always understand things the way we want them to. Sometimes they get things wrong. And like I said, as long as you do it courteously, they're going to appreciate it as well, because it's one less issue they have to deal with when they're writing up a report on their inspection. And when they're going to have an exit meeting, they also may have an entrance meeting. It's a good idea to have your senior study staff present at both of those meetings. It shows the auditor that you are taking the audit seriously. There's nothing worse than just a single person being at an entrance or an exit presentation. It shows that you don't have the time to give to the audit that an auditor expects to see. So have all or most of your major study staff there at either an entrance presentation or an exit presentation to show that you are taking the auditor seriously. If you think that an auditor sees something that is an issue, ask them about it. Do you see something that's concerning? If they're reading your records and they're kind of looking like they're confused or looking like they don't understand what is taking place, you can ask them. Do you see anything that's concerning? An audit is also a two-way street. If you see issues, an auditor can sometimes point out, this is what we expect to see, or this is how you can address this concern. They've seen it all. They know good practices from mediocre practices to poor practices, and they can sometimes give you advice if you need to come up with a corrective action plan on how they expect to see something done. So like I said, it's a two-way street. Sometimes at the end of audits, I ask them, is there anything else that, you see that we could improve upon? And they appreciate that. They want to, you can sometimes use them as a tool to improve your program. And a lot of auditors are open to providing you advice on how to carry out your study. And like I said, it shows that you're taking compliance seriously, and you want to know how you can improve your program, even if they haven't found any issues at all. Again, I talked about this a little bit before, but if you've had prior observations, you were audited previously and you have a corrective action plan, make sure that you followed your corrective action plan to the T, to the letter. If you had dates that things needed to be completed by, make sure that those items were completed by those dates, because the FDA will have your past corrective action plan in hand and be looking to make sure that you carried it out. And if you didn't carry something out, you better have a very good reason why you didn't carry it out, because they're going to want to know that. It's not a time thing. They're not going to want to hear, oh, we just didn't have time. There has to be a legitimate reason for not completing a corrective action plan when you said you had your corrective action plan, when you said you were going to complete your corrective action plan. Here are some don'ts. Never argue with the inspector. You can have a two-way discussion with them if they've gotten something wrong, but never challenge them or argue with them on a finding. If they have a finding and you can't give an explanation as to why they shouldn't have that finding, don't argue with them. You're not going to convince them otherwise. When you argue with them, you're putting a target on your back to look closer to other things. So again, don't argue with them. You can address things after that they've given their final report, but don't argue with them during the audit, because you will lose that argument every time. Don't offer information where they're not asking for it. Again, I talked about the golden moment of silence, or if they ask a question or want to see something, just provide them with a minimal amount of documentation that answers their question. Don't offer additional documents because you want to look good, because sometimes they will find things that they were never looking for. So just give them what information they ask for. Don't offer additional information. Again, don't look nervous or agitated. I know that's a difficult thing to do, but if you can remember that from time to time, it will help you to make you look self-confident. Don't interrupt when someone else is talking. So sometimes an inspector may ask for somebody else on your study staff who's performing a certain task. They're going to want to hear from that person. Even if you are the PI, they're going to want to hear from that person. Don't interrupt that person when they're answering, even if you think they're answering it wrong or anything like that, because that does not look good. When an inspector wants to talk with your study staff, they want to talk with your study staff. until the end. At the end, you can offer explanations or anything, but don't interrupt somebody because it sounds like you're trying to correct them during the conversation. And like I said, the FDA wants to hear from the study staff without the PI or without their supervisor interrupting them. Again, I touched on this earlier, but this is important. If it's not documented, it didn't happen. Whenever you do anything with a study, make sure there is documentation to follow up on it. The FDA doesn't want to hear that you had weekly talks with your study staff, but you have no agendas or anything, any records of that talk ever taking place. Again, if you didn't document something that happened, it didn't happen. You know, safety information. If you're collecting safety information on your subjects, you better document that you collected that safety information and documented when and what it was done. Because again, even if you didn't document it, in their eyes, it didn't happen. And again, covered this earlier, but don't guess when they ask you questions. Don't guess or don't come up with information on the fly onto how you think it was taken care of or how it should have been taken care of. Again, it's okay to say, I don't know, or you know what, we don't have that, or I can find you that information. Don't go making it up on the fly if you don't know it, because like I said, as soon as they catch on to that, it puts a big target on your back for not only that study or other studies that you may be carrying out. Don't ever say off the record. When an auditor shows up, nothing is ever off the record. I was actually in an inspection a month ago, and we had somebody who said, off the record, I cringed in my seat, even though I told this person, do not do that. They still, well, he was friendly and, he wanted to work with us. Nothing is ever off the record with an auditor. Whenever you say something, it is definitely on the record. So don't ever say, oh, off the record, we do it this way. That will be considered on the record to the inspector. Also, don't overwhelm your inspector. A lot of people figure, oh, I'm going to give them all the documentation on the study because it's going to look like I am doing a thorough job. And, I'm going to just overwhelm them with so many documents that they are just going to know that we have documentation for everything. That is actually a poor practice. That is actually puts a target on your back because, again, they know when you hand them so much stuff, they're not going to be able to cover it. And they may take it all with them and go through it. And then all of a sudden, they may find issues with the documentation that you provided to them that they never would have looked at before. So don't overwhelm them with documents, with information that they haven't asked for, because that will not work in inspiring confidence. It may just open you up to additional issues that never would have been fine. And again, just a list of deceptive behaviors. Don't appear overly anxious, uncooperative, or defensive. Don't be guarded or evasive, unhelpful. Don't be apologetic or accepting. If they find an issue, don't apologize for it. Just, don't accept it and say, yes, we always do that, unfortunately. Just listen to them and, say you understand, but that's it. Don't be insincere with them. Again, if you're insincere with them, they figure it out. That puts a target on your back. And don't ever rationalize everybody else does it like that. That's why we do it. If they find an issue, they want the issue addressed. They're not going to want to hear that every other site does that, because, you may put other sites in the target of their audit as well. And again, that's not a reason not to follow proper procedures. All right, findings. What way they find. So first, the negative implications of an FDA audit. The most serious thing is site shutdown. If you have a lot of serious issues, they may shut your site down. Again, this is relatively rare. Most of the time, you're going to address issues as they pop up. But the FDA does have the ability to shut down your site if they find a lot of serious issues with how you're conducting your study. They can also disqualify PI from doing work with the FDA. If you have a lot of serious issues, most of the time these are repeat issues or just blatant things. they could just decide that they don't ever want to work with you on an FDA study again, and you will be disqualified from doing an FDA study in the future. A lot of FDA audits are also subject to freedom of information. They will post a lot of their information. I'll talk about that a little bit in the future, what gets posted. But it just gives bad publicity for your site, for the university, for the institution that you're working on. So again, if you have a bad audit, those are going to be available to the public, and you get bad publicity. Also, legal issues. Again, subjects go and find out that you carried out your study poorly, and they had a poor outcome. They could potentially use that in legal liability to sue you, and that's also not a good thing. All right, so how are findings communicated once your FDA audit is done? The first thing is, normally a lot of FDA auditors, as they find issues during their audit, they may point them out right when they find them. And that's actually a good time for you to start considering a corrective action plan. So if they find an issue and they point it out, start thinking about a corrective action plan on that issue. They'll also sometimes they'll keep all of their findings until the end of your audit, and they'll normally hold an exit interview with the investigator, the PI. And like I said, that's a good time to have your senior people at that exit interview, and they'll point out the issues that they've found. And a lot of times you can have a little bit of a two-way discussion with them at the exit interview and kind of ask them what they expect or how they expect you to address those. And sometimes they will, sometimes they won't point those out. But a lot of times you can have a two-way discussion, and it also shows the auditor that you take their findings seriously. So the exit interview is the first opportunity that they're going to point out issues that they may have found with your study. They may also issue you what's called a written form FDA 483. So an FDA 483 means that you need to address something. Sometimes they're relatively minor issues. Sometimes they may be major issues. But if you get a form FDA 483 issued, you need to address it, even if they say it is a voluntary item. So the form FDA, the form 483 describes serious issues or major issues of your study that they found. Sometimes those may be considered voluntary, but other times those you will need to respond. And it's important, even if they say it's voluntary and you don't need to provide a response, that is nothing further than the truth. The FDA always wants to see a written response to any issues that they outline in a 483, along with a corrective action plan. They say it's encouraged to respond, but don't buy that. They want to see a written response to the FDA 483. So, and that response should include a corrective action plan, along with a schedule for implementation of that corrective action plan. So they don't just want to see a corrective action plan. They want to see dates as to when your corrective action plan will be completed, because again, they're going to carry those back in their next audit and want to see that those are carried out. And like I said, if you need a corrective action plan, they're going to show up again for an inspection of your site, and they're going to want to they're going to have that corrective action plan in place. And this is important. So on your FDA 483 plan, it's going to list two people. It's going to list the auditor, and it's also going to list the FDA district office that's in charge of your study. The FDA auditor, remember, comes from the BMO program. The BMO program doesn't oversee your FDA study. Your district office oversees your study. So when you submit a corrective action plan, it doesn't need to go back to the auditor because they don't care about your corrective action plan. The district office who's overseeing your study cares about your corrective action plan. So address your response to your district office, not necessarily the auditor. And I provided a list of frequently asked questions if you receive an FDA form 483. So it's a good idea to go and check those out if you get a form 483. So here's some common deficiencies that they may find. Failure to follow your plan. Again, if you don't follow your protocol to the T, they are going to pick up on that quickly, and that will be a finding for them. So again, as part of good clinical practice, make sure you follow the approved SOPs to the T. Make sure everything is carried out. Make sure you collect all the data that is specified in your study plan, in the approved study plan, and don't vary from that. Again, protocol deviations, if you, unless they're necessary for the safety of your subject, protocol deviations are not acceptable. If you do have deviations, you should have, as soon as you find them, regardless of an audit, you need to put together a corrective action plan. As soon as you find any study deviations, to come up with a corrective action plan to make sure that you that those deviations don't happen again. So you might have some deviations. This may be before an auditor ever shows up and you realize, oops, my study team didn't collect, the proper safety data information, or didn't fill out the forms properly. Come up with a corrective action plan at that point when you find a deviation. That may include retraining your staff, meeting with your staff, going over with, what was missed, why it was missed, and how it's not going to be missed in the future. If you have that in place when an auditor shows up, they're going to write you up for a deviation, but your corrective action plan maybe that you came up with may be acceptable to them, and they may not include that in one of the findings, or you may not need to respond to it. Inadequate record keeping. Again, this is something they always find. Yeah, we collected that data, but we just didn't write it down. Again, if it's not written down, if it's not documented, didn't happen to the FDA. Inadequate accountability for investigational drugs or products. Again, when they look at your inventory and what you should have on hand versus what you document that you have on hand, those better match up. So make sure you keep good records of everything with whether it be a drug or a device that you have on your study. Inadequate subject protection, the informed consent process. Make sure that you properly documented that the informed consent process takes place. And remember, informed consent process is not just at the beginning of the study. You sign the consent form, we're done with informed consent process. You may have information that you collect during your study that you may need to go back and pass to your subjects. Let's say you're seeing adverse events that are or may be related to the study. You may need to go back to your subjects and inform them of those adverse events, because that may make a decision as to whether they want to continue on with your study. So informed consent is a process that is ongoing throughout the life of the study. It doesn't just take place at the beginning of the study and we informed, we had you sign a consent form, you're all consent. That's a continuing process that goes on. It's a two-way street where you may need to give them additional information as the study progresses, and make sure that you document everything that happens with informed consent. Okay, so points to consider when you receive a 483. Again, take 483 seriously, even if they just state, voluntary, these are voluntary items that you should put in place. They're not voluntary from the FDA. They want to see that you take those seriously and put a corrective action plan or change your study protocol according to what's voluntary. Accept responsibility. If it's appropriate, if you messed up, you need to accept the responsibility and come up and tell them, why did this happen? Well, you know what? I guess the training wasn't as thorough as we thought. And then come up with a corrective action plan. We are going to provide additional training and show that that training was carried out, and document it and do that. If the letter is inaccurate, sometimes like I said, the FDA gets things wrong. Provide them with why it was inaccurate, why it wasn't, why they got it wrong. And like I said, provide that to them, and sometimes they'll clear that. Again, they want to see a clear understanding of what went wrong. If you have an issue with the study, why did it go wrong? Why didn't you collect this data? Why didn't you document it? Like I said, take responsibility, but come up with a good, have a good understanding of why it wasn't performed, and what you're going to do to make sure that it doesn't happen in the future. Give an understanding. Well, I thought my study team understood it, but apparently they didn't. So we're going to provide additional training. Again, if you need a corrective action plan, propose what you need to do in great detail. They don't want to see corrective action plans that are broad or lacking details. If you need to change your SOPs in order to match what you do, then you need to propose that you're going to change your SOPs and get them approved. Need for additional training? It's always a great idea when things are missed to provide additional training and document that training. Again, others item-specific responses. I can't give you a list of everything you might need to address, but again, address it in detail and give them a description why the issues happened, that you understand why they happened and how you're going to fix it, and be specific. And that includes dates that you're going to carry out things. So, you're going to carry out new training. It's going to be carried out by the end of the month or, within 6 weeks, and then make sure it gets done within that time period. There's nothing worse that the FDA sees as you said you were going to carry something out and you didn't do it within the time frame that you proposed, because they're going to approve your corrective action plan. And once they approve it, again, like any other SOP, they expect you to carry it out to the T. If you need clarification on things, feel free to reach out and ask for clarification on an item, that you don't understand. There's nothing worse than guessing and trying to put together a plan that you're guessing on, and then only to have the FDA say, no, you know what, you just didn't get it, because that puts an additional target on your back. Feel free to ask them for clarification. Sometimes they may not provide the clarification, but many times they will. If you misunderstood what they're asking for, there's nothing wrong with asking them to say, I may have gotten this wrong. I just want to pass this by you and make sure that I got it right. Because they may offer you advice on it too to help you out. All right, here are responses that are not persuasive to the FDA. Again, if it's voluntary, not sending a response, even if they say they don't require a response, is not very persuasive to them. It tells them that you're not taking them very seriously. Vague or general responses to violations. They don't want to see vague general responses. We're going to fix this in the future. This will not happen again. That is not a corrective action plan. They want to see specifics on your how you're going to respond to violations. Blaming third parties for deficiencies. If you're the PI, you are, again, responsible for all of it. You can't say, you know what, my study staff did this wrong. I provided them with the proper training. They still got it wrong. That is not persuasive to the FDA. You need to take ownership and provide a way that the deficiencies are not going to happen again. Asserting that another regulatory authority had different findings, they're not going to want to hear that, you spoke with the sponsor or, even if it's the IRB, they had different findings. Their findings are what they want you to address, and stating that somebody else had different findings is not persuasive to them. Again, referencing audit certificates. If you had an internal audit or another sponsor looked at your study and said it's fine, they're not going to want to see that. If they're finding deficiencies, unless you can explain those deficiencies, they're not going to want to hear that somebody else told you that it was okay to do it that way. Absence or loss of records. Again, they don't want to hear any excuses as to why you didn't have records. If you don't have them, take ownership. Say you don't have them, you will have them in the future. Stating that you just didn't have them, but those got carried out is not persuasive. Okay, so after the inspection, what is the FDA going to do? They're going to prepare an establishment inspection report. So they issue the FDA 483. That comes from the auditor, the actual person who did the audit. You're going to get that. He's going to pass that information on to the FDA Center for Evaluation, and they are going to take that FDA 483, look at it, and issue you an establishment inspection report. And that's why you want to get back on your response to the FDA 483, because if you get your response back before that information, before the 483 goes to the FDA evaluation office, your auditor is going to pass that FDA 483 along with the response that you provided to the committee that's going to provide your EIR, and they will take that into consideration when they provide your establishment inspection report. So again, that's why you want to respond diligently to your FDA 483, because those reports will go hand in hand. Okay. So here are what some of the findings can be. No action indicated. That's relatively rare. Almost nobody gets a no action indicated report. Most of the time, you're going to get a voluntary action indicated letter. They're going to kind of give you voluntary things that you could do. Again, don't consider them voluntary. You should come up with a plan to address those voluntary issues. The worst is official action indicated. These are serious items that you need to address promptly and make sure that you do. If you get an official action indicated, you need to take those extremely seriously. Okay, so here's going to kind of be one of the 4 letters. I'll just go through the 4 letters that you're going to receive. The general letter, if they didn't observe anything, you may get a letter stating that they haven't found anything that worth noting. Sometimes they don't even send a letter. If they found nothing at all wrong with your site, they may not even send a letter. You may not get one. But generally, these are pretty rare. Normally, you're going to get an informational letter. And usually that will show some deviations. They may be not very serious, come with a warning letter, and may be voluntary. But again, you will want to respond to an informational letter. The next letter is a warning letter. These are the serious items. You know, if they found serious violations, you need to provide a corrective action plan, and that corrective action plan needs to be very effective with the time frame for addressing those. And they're going to check on they're going to actually review your corrective action plan and make sure that's adequate. So the FDA will give you approval on your corrective action plan for when you have serious violations. And the 4th is the most serious, and this is a notice of initiation of disqualification proceedings and an opportunity to explain. This is where they found so many serious issues that they are considering shutting down your site. And you will have an opportunity to meet with them and have a conference with the FDA and provide a corrective action plan on this. But these are really serious items, and you need to make sure that you address these to the T and come up with a very effective corrective action plan. And if the FDA doesn't consider your corrective action plan serious enough, they will begin the process of shutting down your site. Sharing of results. So copies of all of these items are going to be posted on their website. So any of the FDA 483 letters, any the EIR report will all be posted on their site and be subject to freedom of information. So again, that's where you want to work with the FDA very closely if they find any issues and make sure that you address those issues, because they're going to put that out on the site for everybody to see. And you can go on the FDA site and see warning letters that people have been given. So again, like I said, that can provide bad publicity for your site. So take these seriously and address them seriously, because again, information is going to be available to the general public on your audit. So I'm not going to go through these, but I did provide additional material, and you can go through these at your leisure. So I have enforcement actions. I have clinical investigator inspection lists. These are lists of the inspections that took place and the reports on those inspections. I have classification codes that you may see in your letters, deficiency codes that you may see in your letters posted here. I have some YouTube videos. These are actually really good. Just talk about how to deal with FDA studies and do's and don'ts for the FDA studies. They're a good reference to go through. They're not that long. And again, they will help you and give you additional information that I have not provided. And here's some more resources that I've provided. Again, go through these at your leisure, and they're all really good documents. And again, be proactive. Don't go through these just before when you receive notification of an audit, because you will not have time. Go through them now when you're considering doing an FDA study, and they will definitely help you to do your study properly and to work with an auditor and deal with an auditor. So I hope this was helpful, and a lot of the advice I give you doesn't just go along with an FDA audit, but you can use a lot of this advice with any audit that you receive. It's a lot of good advice from a person who's had lots and lots of audits. You know, just as a note, one of my first audits, I had one of the representatives here at the school almost go limp when we had a CDC audit, and the CDC auditor showed up unannounced, showed up at this person's office, and he almost sunk in his chair and didn't know what to do. And he was the lead person on the audit. I kind of had to take charge of the audit, and it was my first audit to go through. So it was a really good lesson on, having self-confidence that you could deal with an audit. And like I said, all the advice I'm provided, a lot of it is from personal experience, and it works. So I hope this helps you. Thank you very much for having the patience to listen to me.
Thank you. And thank you very much for the very wonderful presentation. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much, everybody, and have a good evening.
Have a good evening, everyone.